Welcome back to the final week in our series, It's Complicated. My name is Dan, and I'm glad you're joining us, whether it's online in Dixon City, Wilkes-Barre, or Clark Summit. And before we dive right in, I want to tell you what's coming up in a couple of weeks, because I'm excited about this new series that we're starting in 2 weeks called Jesus On. And throughout this series, throughout the summer, we're going to look at some of those big topics that Jesus raises in his most famous sermon, the Sermon on the Mount. Topics like happiness and worry, integrity and influence. And so you want to be back all throughout the summer for this series because, well, Jesus knows what he's talking about. And if you want to get a handle on life, you want to listen to him. Okay, now back to It's Complicated. See, throughout this series, we're talking about the things that complicate our relationships, the issues that create tension and complication and even the greatest pain in our best places where we can have the most joy in our relationships with family and friends and coworkers. And we know that relationships is what life is all about. But then, stuff happens and it gets complicated. And so far in this series, we've talked about how the expectations that we bring into our relationships, they make it complicated. And how the trash we bring in, the differences that we bring in, make our relationships complicated. And today we want to talk about this last one, how the conflict styles that we bring into our relationships, they bring complications. And so to get us started off, we're going to look at a proverb together. Proverbs is a part of the Bible where there's a bunch of wise sayings all put together to help you figure out how to thrive at life. And in Proverbs 15:1, it says this: "A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger." See, when the blood pressure begins to rise and words begin to fly, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but harsh words, they stir up anger. And what you do when conflict comes has the potential to diffuse it or to detonate it. It reminds me of those men and women in the bomb squad. Their job is to run towards what might explode, and they have to be really, really careful at what they do because they could make it worse, even deadly. And we want to be like the bomb squad that comes in and diffuses and disarms the bomb. We don't want to be the bomb that goes off and blows up and hurts everyone nearby. And when it comes to conflict, we all have different ways of escalating the situation. We all have what I would call a conflict style. And so we're going to look at one author calls our four most common ways of handling conflict when we climb into the ring of an argument. And maybe you can just see yourself in one of these. So the first way that we fight is going for the knockout, going for the KO. This is the person that fights to win. They want to be right, but even if they're not right, they still are going to win the fight. That's what it's all about. They're going to win the argument at all costs. They're going for the knockout. And this is a pretty typical way to handle conflict. I mean, something comes up and they bow up and things get more heated and they start yelling louder and things get more intense and they keep going above it. They're going to win this thing. And if there's somehow a way to measure how much truth and love are in a conflict, in this person's conflict style, there's no love, just truth. Just truth. And the problem is that none of us have all of the truth all of the time. None of us has the perfect perspective on any situation. And you might be right, but you're only partially right because you don't know it all. And when you act like you do, when you got to be right, when you got to win the argument, well, that leaves no room for understanding and for any true intimacy. And so the result of this fight is I win and you lose, which means, of course, the relationship loses. Now, the second way that we can handle conflict is what the author calls running from the ring. Running from the ring. This person avoids conflict. They're just trying to escape it. And because they're avoiding conflict, it can look really spiritual. It can look impressive. I mean, they want to avoid fighting. Isn't that a good thing? I think that's a good thing. This person might be very spiritual. But it's not a healthy thing if this becomes a habit. What happens to this person, if they keep it up, is they get very good at avoiding people. And so, if this is your approach to conflict, you get really good at running away. There is no truth and no love because you're not there. And running leads to a life of quitting things, of quitting the team or quitting that circle of friends, of quitting the church or quitting on relationships. And when you run from the ring, nothing gets resolved. And eventually, the relationship is lost, even if you stick around, even if you're there physically. And the result here then is we both lose. The third way that we can handle conflict is by taking a dive in the ring. That's when you throw the fight. And if the last one looks spiritual, this one looks really spiritual. I mean, you're putting others first. You're compromising, and you're letting them win. You're letting them go first. I mean, if you let them have their own way, isn't that you just being so nice? When you stop and you think about it, you realize that's not really what's going on here. This conflict style has something that's missing, and it's the truth. And so you might maintain a sense of peace in the relationship, but it's only superficial. And without truth, this relationship will not grow stronger. It will not grow deeper. And in this scenario where someone's always taking the dive, always letting the other person win, it means the dominant person keeps getting more and more dysfunctional. And your relationship goes then from bad to worse, which means I lose, you win, and of course the relationship loses again. You see yourself in any of those conflict styles? I mean, you're not that way all the time, but you tend to kind of be there most of the time. There's one more. The fourth way that you can handle conflict is to fight with truth and love. Truth and love together. And when you leverage both, truth and love, grace and truth together, you can then have healthy discussion and conflict resolution. And the result of that is that we both win, all parties involved. And that's what we want. That's what we want. The truth is, conflict will start. You can't control that. Conflict will come. You can't get rid of it. Conflict will start, but you can decide how it ends. Conflict's going to happen. There will be family conflict. There will be marriage conflict. There will be conflict with that roommate or that business partner or that friend. There will be conflict. You can't escape it. It's just part of living in a fallen world with broken people like you and like me. But how you handle that conflict can lead to health or to hurt. And so today in our time together, I want to look at 3 principles regarding conflict and then one really practical way for you to put all this into practice. Because we're all going to face loaded conversations. And I'm going to teach you something that, quite honestly, I'm still learning myself. I'm going to teach you and myself how to fight for the relationship. Now, we started off this series in one verse from Romans 12:18. And in this passage, the Apostle Paul he's writing to a group of people that he's never met before, a group of people in Rome. That's why the book is called Romans. It's actually just a letter. And he wrote a letter to them explaining all the things that God had done for them through the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And because of what Jesus did, it changed everything. And so he tells them all about it. Then he gets to a part where he starts to go, because of everything that has been done for you in Christ, you can live a new life. It can be a changed life. And so he writes this: if it's possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. If it's possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. And the first principle that we need to understand about conflict is this: that you are responsible for you. You are responsible for you. If it's possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. I love it. Super honest, super transparent. If it is possible. I mean, that assumes that sometimes it is possible and it is up to you to live at peace with others, to resolve conflict. That you often have the power to diffuse the situation. It's a choice that you can make. And I wonder how many conflicts wouldn't even get off the ground. They wouldn't even happen if we just took responsibility, not for them, but for us. Remember Proverbs 15:1? A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. That gentle answer or harsh word, those are our reactions. Those are the things that we can control. Those are the things that we can do to set a conflict in a different direction. We can snuff it out instead of lighting the fire so it builds up. And so our words, our body language, our tone, all have the power to escalate or de-escalate the situation. But let's be honest. Even when you're at your best, others may not be at theirs. If it is possible, assumes that sometimes it is possible for you to disarm the situation, but it also assumes that sometimes it's just not possible. Sometimes, despite your best efforts to disarm the bomb, it goes off. And Paul, he's not putting that on you. It's not your fault. You are responsible for you. And if they react poorly, you are in good company. You know, I remember this guy, his name was Jesus. He was the kindest man who ever lived. Not everyone reacted positively to Jesus. In fact, if I remember correctly, they decided to respond to the man who had the most love ever of all time in the world by, what was it? They killed him. They killed him, right? So you're responsible for you. Sometimes peace is not possible, but you are in charge of you, which is why the Apostle Paul says that right in the verse. As far as it depends on you, as far as it depends on you. You're responsible for how you act, not how they react. You can't control them. You can't own their issues. You are responsible for you, just you. And honestly, I think this is liberating because some of you guys are walking around through life owning other people's junk and dysfunction. You feel responsible for their bad behavior, their blow-ups, their toxic actions. And guess what? You're not. As far as it depends on you means there's a line where your responsibility ends and theirs begins. As far as you can go, go. But then it's up to them. So the second principle is this: be a peacemaker, not a peacekeeper. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace. Be a peacemaker, not a peacekeeper. They're not the same thing. Peacekeeping is avoiding or squelching conflict, maybe even absorbing it. As we said earlier, if you take the dive in the ring, you're always running from the ring, the relationship doesn't get stronger. That's peacekeeping. Peacekeeping is avoiding the conflict. Peacemaking is resolving the conflict. Peacemaking requires that we wade wisely into the problem. In James 1:19, it gives us a powerful insight into how to do this, how to be a peacemaker. He writes, "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry." We usually get that backwards, right? We're usually slow to listen and quick to speak. At least, I am. He's saying, slow down. Listen. Really stop preparing your response. Listen. Slow. You're still talking. Slow down and listen. Listen. There's many of you who are experts at planning your court case while they're finishing their sentences. And that means you didn't hear them. You're just ready to speak your piece, to let your bit out. Like my aunt used to say, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Listen twice as much as you talk. And so here's one of those insights into being a peacemaker. To forge a stronger relationship out of the fight, you need to practice what we call active listening. Active listening is a skill that you can learn. And it's simple. All you do is reflect the other person's emotions and comments back to them to show that you heard them. I'll say that again. You reflect their emotions and comments back to them to show that you actually heard them. So here's what that could look like. Your spouse or your roommate or your parent says, "I feel like I am always picking up after you. Your stuff is everywhere. It's driving me crazy. Why are you so lazy? I'm not your personal cleaning service." This does not spark joy, all right? And using active listening, you need to pick the best answer out of the 3 that I'm going to give you that would disarm the situation. So this is a test. Please play along. In response to that, you could, turn up the TV. And don't pretend like you haven't pretended like you didn't hear them. You do it. You could A, turn up the TV. B, you could reply, "I'm too busy. Get off my back." I don't know if that would de-escalate. You can not try that out later. Or C, you can do this. It sounds like you feel that I'm taking advantage of you by letting you clean up my stuff. And you're exhausted and frustrated as a result. Is that right? Do I have that right? I hope you chose C. You could feel how that would just let the tension out of the room, right? It says, I heard you. And some of you are laughing because you're like, that's just way too perfect. Nobody does that. And I'll let you in on a little secret. It is too perfect, but I started doing it. And I started doing this in my relationships. And the hilarious thing is that they'll look at me and they'll go, are you doing that active listening thing? And I'll be like, and they'll be like, you are. And I'll be like, you want me to stop? And they'll be like, well, no, you heard me. And so maybe, even if you're going to try this with someone that's here today, when you go home and you try it, they're going to give you that look. Are you doing that thing? And you can say, yes, I'm really trying to listen. And I don't think they'll want you to stop. My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. And active listening helps you really slow down and hear them. So 3 principles for conflict. You are responsible for you. Be a peacemaker and not a peacekeeper. And the third and final principle is this. Don't forget that you have an enemy. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. And where it says everyone, the literal translation is every man, or with all men, or all mankind. Paul is saying to do everything that you can to live in harmony with the people around you. Paul is saying, I know that you feel like people are your main obstacle, but seek to live at peace with all people. And Paul, you need to know, isn't saying this in a context where everyone got along and where they had a perfect little suburban life and no one was fighting with each other. Paul is writing this to people who were experiencing intense problems and conflicts in their relationships on every level, to the extent that they could react with hatred and resentment and even acts of revenge. So you need to understand what duress they're under when he writes this to them. Look at the verses around this one. Romans 12:14 says, bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Then a little bit later it says, do not repay anyone evil for evil. They did evil to you. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. On the other side of that verse, do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, it is mine to avenge, and I will repay, says the Lord. You see what kind of situation he's writing to? Like they're experiencing physical and personal and familial pain and persecution. They're losing stuff and people. That's the kind of conflict they find themselves in. And he's saying, as much as it depends on you, you live on peace, you live with peace with all men, all of them, all of those kind of people, even the people that are doing that to you. See, Paul couldn't be more clear. Christians are to work at being peacemakers. We should be the last to be offended or outraged. We are called to build bridges where others throw bricks. And this does apply to your social media posts. And even when you are the target of some persecution, you're to bless and not to curse. And even when evil is done to us, we have the power to forgive and to move forward. We are called to be peacemakers. As much as possible, we don't fight against people. We fight for people. That's what we're here for. So, we are to do everything that we can to live at peace with every person. And that's what the Bible teaches over and over and over again. The Bible calls us to make peace with people. But get this, it calls us to make war with our enemy. And we have an enemy. And it's not other humans. It's a spiritual enemy and a spiritual war. And the second we forget this in our relationships, we are sitting ducks because we're at war. Near the end of his letter to the Ephesians, Paul writes this, finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, physical people, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. That's where the battle is. And there's a lot more there than we have time to go into. But this is one of the most neglected truths in the Bible, and it's affecting your relationships. See, Paul explicitly states that we are at war, not with one another, but with an enemy and with his forces. There's a war that rages all around us, and it affects us. And here, just rapid fire, some of the facts from the passage that we just read. Just rapid fire, just so you get a context for this battle. Verse 10 tells us that the war is a struggle that requires God's power to win. Verse 11 tells us that the war is against the deliberate and effective schemes or strategies of the devil. Verse 12 tells us that the war is spiritual and must be fought with spiritual weapons. The rest of the passage teaches us that this war is invisible, but the results are not. And 4 times, over and over again in this paragraph, Paul tells them to stand their ground and fight. The idea is that if you don't, you will fall. So there's a simple question here. Is your picture of life more like Mr. Rogers or Saving Private Ryan? Is it more like a walk on the beach or more like storming the beaches of Normandy? Because we are at war. And what I've found is that most Christians don't have a category for spiritual warfare when they think about their relationships. When it comes to marriages and friendships, we have categories like that, like the 5 love languages, or great research that's gone into books like Love and Respect, or the category of being here to serve, servant leadership, to serve others. We have categories for our temperaments, for our personalities, for our Enneagram numbers. We have all sorts of categories for understanding and then navigating our relationships. But rarely, if ever, do I find someone who has this category, the category of war. And any view of the Christian life that leaves out spiritual warfare is incomplete. Because without this category, we'll be taken out by the enemy. A couple of years ago, my wife and I were in a place in our relationship where we had kind of gone to another level. We'd worked through some really tough things, and we'd grown together, and it was a sweet season. We were flying high. And we would both say that it was one of the sweetest times in our marriage. We're really enjoying that unity and harmony that had come. And then overnight, things took a dive. It was like we were flying together, and then one of the engines blew out, and then our plane was starting to plummet towards the ground. And so we started fighting with each other. And I got frustrated that my dream relationship had suddenly taken a dive. And I started to blame her, and I was like, quick, just fix your engine, right? Fix your issue right now, and then we can fly again, right? And then after a little bit, I realized it wasn't her problem. She wasn't doing anything wrong. It wasn't her. And then, honestly, I started to blame myself. I started to kind of beat up on myself. Like, why do I always hurt the people closest to me? And why does it have to degrade to these kind of fights? And, Dan, you're such an idiot. Dan, fix your engine so that your relationship could fly again. But after exploring that a little bit, we discovered that it, wasn't me causing the breakdown, just this time. And we were operating without clarity, without confidence. We were stuck in what you could call the fog of war because we forgot there was another category. There are times when it's not you and it's not them, it's the enemy. And when I realized that, I apologized to my wife. We talked about it. And instead of butting heads, we turned and we started fighting back to back. And the fog lifted. Afterward, I laughed. How can I forget? We live in a world at war. And you need to realize who God has created you to be. In part, it is to be a warrior. Full of His power, with His armor, fighting for the relationships in your life, fighting for your friends and the spouse and the boyfriend or girlfriend, the roommate. Start fighting for the relationships. And quite honestly, there's a very simple way to start this process, and it's just by asking the question. When conflict arises, pull back and ask, where is this coming from? Where is this coming from? Because you might be surprised by the answer. I wonder how many times we get into a fight that seems to come out of nowhere, And we just turn and we blame the other person, and there's a blow up and there's a fight. And the reason that fight really happened was not because of them and not because of you, is because the enemy came in, stirred the pot, and slipped out unnoticed. Ask the question. Like, is this coming from us? It can, but is this one coming from us, from inside of us, from something with us, or is it coming against us? And answering that question sets you up to take some action. It's a beautiful thing when you stop fighting against each other and start fighting for and with each other. Just so you understand how common this is, I want to share a story from last week. Last week was baptism weekend, and we saw person after person take that step of going public with their faith, and it was an amazing weekend. Many people responded to the prompting of God and took the plunge. In fact, and this is awesome, 94 people were baptized last weekend. I mean, this is awesome. And like every one of them is an awesome story of God at work. There's a couple that I want to tell you about. They said I could share their story. I want to tell you about what almost didn't happen. There's a couple who doesn't normally get into big fights, but last Saturday they did. And they were supposed to get baptized on Sunday, but they were so angry with each other that she told him that she wasn't going in the morning, she was out. So the night before, they're going to experience this beautiful and meaningful step of faith. Things get ugly, and it's just not going to happen. The next morning, they cooled off a little bit, and he realizes what's going on, and he comes back into her, and he says, I'm sorry. This is exactly what the devil wants. He doesn't want us to get baptized. We can't let him win. We have to get baptized, and so they did. It's happening all the time. We live in a world at war. They realized that they had an enemy, and they fought against him instead of each other. And how many times has something beautiful blown up in your face and you've blamed the other person and you fought them instead of the real enemy? If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Fight for the relationship. So 3 key principles. You're responsible for you. There's a line where that stops and they got to deal with them. Be a peacemaker, not a peacekeeper. Wade into the mess, actively listen, and see if you can't diffuse things. And don't forget that you have an enemy. All right, okay. We have these principles helping us out to live out this verse, and we understand conflict better. That's great. We know that we need to fight for the relationship, but how do we do it? Well, I want to give you an approach that was given to me that's helped me and many others navigate tricky conversations. Because there will be many times in your life when you need to raise an issue that may cause someone to get defensive or explosive. But ignoring that thing is the wrong thing to do. So, you will have conversations about their work performance or their attitude with their parent or the way that they keep treating you or that blind spot that everyone sees except for them. And how do you bring it up so that it doesn't blow up? Well, the method is called the OIC method. It works in all kinds of situations, and wink, wink, nudge, nudge, pay attention. This is the part you want to write down, all right? So get out your phones, get out your notes. You're going to want to take this with you. It can help you big time. So here's how to have a tough conversation. After you've prayed about it and you've thought about it, you want to bring up the behavior you've witnessed. This is the first step. This is observation. This is the O in the OIC. Bring up the behavior you witnessed. Notice what I did not say. I did not say, come and tell them how hurt or offended you are. I didn't say tell them why they are wrong or why they did what they did. Don't guess about the motivation. Just talk about what you can really see. Name the behavior, not what you believe happened, but what everyone could see happened. This sets up the conversation to be based on facts and not just feelings. This is crucial to keeping the conversation focused. So as we go through this, I'm just going to give you a couple examples. One's with a coworker. So maybe it would go like this. This is just one part of the conversation. This is maybe how you would start it. You'd say, Jack, I noticed how you were quick to point out the flaws in the new sales plan. You shot down ideas during our brainstorm session, and you laughed at Cindy when she said that we could still hit our goals at this quarter if we tried harder. Just raising it happened, right? You're just raised. I noticed, I saw, did I see what I thought I saw? And then name it. Or maybe at home, you can say, honey, I see a lot of things on the floor and counters around the house that look like they came from you. Just putting it out there, okay? Observation. Second step is interpretation. This is where, giving them the benefit of the doubt, you offer possible reasons for the behavior. And there's 3 parts to this. I put them down here for you. Value, you want to give 2 best case scenarios and 1 bad case scenario. So this is where you want to create a safe place, and so you let them know how you value them. You start with that. And then you give them a couple best case scenarios. So before they can get defensive, you show that you're believing the best in them, you're in their corner, you're trying to help them succeed. You think it could be a fluke, you think it could be a random event, you think it could just be something maybe you saw wrong. So 2 best case scenarios. And then 1 bad case scenario. That says bad case. That doesn't say worst case scenario. This isn't 2 positive things that are probably not possible, they're just fluffy things so that you can get to this thing. It's not that. This isn't a trick. It's not 2 positive things so you can get to the thing you really think they did and why they did it. It's not a trick. It's 2 possibilities where you believe the best in them, and you are going to start there by extending trust, by extending grace, by leading with love. The bad case scenario is because you're saying there really was a problem, I think, and we might need to change something to get things where they need to be. So, for example, to Jack, he's the cynic at work and he's killing the team's morale. You might say something like, Jack, you've been here a long time and you've had a lot of experience and maybe the most on our team, which means that you have a lot of perspective that we could learn from, and you have to mean it, and that's value. And we're under a lot of pressure to hit these goals this quarter, and maybe you're feeling as if maybe you're feeling really stressed, and this is what it looks like when you're stressed. I mean, I get that. Or maybe you have a solution and you feel like nobody's listening, but if they did, it might turn things around. 2 best case scenarios. Or maybe you really don't believe that we can make progress on this in time. Maybe that's why you were saying that. To your spouse or roommate or child who won't clean up after themselves, you might say, like, you do a lot around here to make things work. I love how you do this, and I love how you do this. And you've been pushing really extra hard at work or at school, so maybe you didn't realize how much of your stuff ends up on the floor. Maybe you have a different system that you've been using, and I keep interrupting your system by swooping in and picking it up. Or maybe you haven't even really considered how much of my time is spent cleaning up after you. Value, best case, bad case. Last, ask for clarification. Ask for clarification. Ask them to clarify, and there's 2 parts to this. What happened, and then what they think should happen next. What happened and what should happen next. You've just set up this conversation. You've framed it towards success. You haven't come at them hard. You've raised something up that they can't argue with. They might try a little bit, but you can say, well, then what did happen? And they can narrow it down to the part of the behavior that they are willing to talk about. Then you give them a couple best case scenarios. You're saying, I believe in you. I believe you could change. I mean, there might be a really valid reason why this went wrong this way. And then you open it up and ask them to clarify what happened and what should happen next. And so for asking them what happened, it might sound like this. Jack, have you noticed how your opinion has a lot of sway on the mood in the room? I mean, help me understand what's going on. Let's help me understand what happened. Or to the messy person in your house, you might say, help me understand why this keeps happening. I mean, what are your thoughts on how we can work this out? And then help me understand what should happen next. This is where you say something like to Jack, your coworker, so next time, do you want me to signal you when your influence starts to take over the room? Or is there a code word you want me to use? I mean, what can I do to help you? What do you want to do next time? Or with the messy roommate, you're grounded. No, just kidding. That one you want to do. When this happens again, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to kind of pick it all up and put it in one place for you to sort out? Or do you want me to, want to set a time that you pick, but I'll know that it's going to be cleaned up by that time, and then I don't have to worry about it. And so that's it. Put all in those pieces together: observation, interpretation, clarification. That's OIC. And that's the way that you can talk that diffuses people's defensiveness. This doesn't take all the tension out of the conversation, but it's a powerful way to approach it so that people know that they are loved and that you're rooting for them, and that you're looking for a solution, not someone to slam. It creates a situation where they can change with your support. It's powerful, it's helpful. Maybe that's why you needed to be here today. That's how you fight for the relationship. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. The conflict makes all of our relationships more complicated, but what we do with that conflict has the power to help or to hurt those relationships. And our relationships need people who have the courage to speak up in truth and love, to be full of grace and truth. And so as our prayer, we're going to sing a final song. A song about God leading us to love others, to love those around us. And I want it to be your prayer, that God would build us up into the kind of people that would fight for the relationship. And so as we turn towards that, would you watch this with me?